Hello and welcome to Higher Automation, the podcast brought to you by Hai Robotics, where we explore smarter solutions for your inventory, fulfillment, and warehouse operations. I am your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. Happy New Year, and cheers to everyone tuning in for surviving peak season. Now the real fun begins. Returns season. For many retailers, the new year comes with a flood of returned goods, stretching warehouse operations to their limits. So today we are talking about the current state of returns processing with two industry experts to unpack what's working, what's not, and how goods to person automation can turn this post-holiday headache into a cost-effective opportunity for growth. Let me introduce you to our guest today, John Santagate, Senior Vice President, Robotics, Körber Supply Chain Software, and Matt Kelly, Director of Business Development for Hai Robotics USA. Thank you both for being with me today.
Happy to be here, Michelle. Nice to see you, Matt.
It's good to be here.
We have a lot of stuff to get to, and I'm so glad that both of you are here because this really can be a painful season sometimes for a lot of companies here. So let's dive right in. When it comes to managing customer returns, it's one of the biggest pain points in the e-commerce system right now. So John, can you help maybe paint a picture of what the state of returns processing looks like right now?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you guys for having me here. I'm happy to always happy to talk robot and talk shop with folks that are passionate about the industries. Yeah, I mean, you hit on the point straight away, Michelle, right? Peak season, customers are buying a lot of things via e-commerce, and many folks, I'm guilty of it, might buy 2 or 3 of the same product to fit it to the right size and things of that nature to make sure you're getting exactly what you want. Because let's face it, you can't put your hands on products when you're shopping e-com, right? You can do that in a retail store, and certainly you can do, shopping in the retail store and buy online as well. But still, I find, there's a lot of product that comes in this time of year, especially around the holidays, that ends up coming back to the distribution channel. So I don't know that off the top of the head, maybe, I don't know, Matt, if you've got the figures, but what the percentage is of returns. But indeed, we do know that has substantially increased year over year as the percentage of retail fulfillment has gone through the e-commerce channels, right? So as we see more and more products being bought via online, via e-commerce, right? There's more and more risk of having something go back into those channels through a different avenue. The state of returns is simply the fact that it's constantly growing. We're seeing customers requesting more SKUs, more availability, next day shipping, but also expecting to be able to send anything back after they've got it into their own possession. So, the great thing is, right, there's different channels, right? We've seen an evolution in terms of how things are returned. You can drop it in the mail, take it to UPS, take it into a Kohl's store, or a direct to a store. You can take it back to a retailer at times, even sometimes when you buy online, return it right back to a retail store that's local. So, it is quite complex as more and more product is going back to the retailer and the e-com channels.
Yeah, John makes a good call out too on the percentage, and that's gone up significantly year over year. So about one in 4 Americans are going to return product this holiday season, and I'm certainly violently guilty of it, ordering multiple sizes of much of the shoes that I order. But that's the reality, as John calls out. I mean, we're not going into stores, and a lot of that has to do with COVID. A lot of that has to do with just changes in the buying culture, and that's putting a tremendous burden on these manufacturers and also the 3PLs that handle these goods to handle the returns that come back after the holiday season.
Yeah, Matt, and I think you mentioned shoes specifically, right? I think it's also interesting to think about, right? Different product categories are going to have a different return rate, right? And again, I don't know off the top of my head what the return rate of small grade electronics is. I can wager the return rate of footwear is substantial, right? As I said, I'm guilty of it. 3 different, going to buy the same shoe in 3 different sizes. One of them is going to fit, 2 of them are going to be uncomfortable, and 2 of them are going to go right back.
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned electronics. So the return rate for electronics is about 8 to 10%. Apparel is 25 to 40%. And, I would say too, and John brings up a good point, is it's also about the product that's being returned. That will contribute to the cost of processing that return. So an electronics product, very high value product that has to be looked at, analyzed, understood if there's any damage. That really puts an even greater burden on a 3PL or a warehouse fulfillment center to understand, is the product coming back able to be resold? It's a lot easier to look at a shirt or a shoe and know that, yes, we can ship this back out and resell it. But a computer, AirPods, all those things come with a lot more intricacies on how it's processed at the returns level.
Yeah, and just on that, Matt, I had recently had the opportunity to view a lot of warehouses, right? As you can imagine, I'm in warehouses all the time, thinking about, how do we improve the processes, whether it's inbound or outbound material flow, and was in one recently with a rather young company that's growing tremendously, right? They're in the space of early life products, right? Their returns center had pallets upon pallets of product that has gone out and come back and is due for return. They've got to inspect everything. You've got to take a brand new box that may not have been opened at the customer site, open it up, confirm that everything is there in working order. And if it's not, oftentimes that stuff goes for destruction, right? And the stuff that's good goes for resale, oftentimes at a lower value. So, it's not just to your point, it's not just the process of returning, it's what do you do once you have it back, right? Because there's a cost element, and that's an area where we see a lot of customers really looking to figure out, how do we improve any aspect of the returns process, because all aspects of that process are costing the business money, especially the process of, hey, this is a perfectly good widget, right? But now we've got to destroy it because it went out to a customer site. So, we really want to see, how do we reduce the returns impact, which is really difficult to do because now you're trying to influence customer behavior, to how do you optimize the returns process so that you have fewer wasted products or fewer liquidation products on the back end.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the destruction. I think there was a kind of a groundbreaking article, mini documentary that came out a few years ago from CNBC on Amazon, and just how much product they destroy every year because it's too costly to process that return. So it's a lot easier just to say, all right, we're going to trash it. And then you have waste, you've got all the environmental implications that brings. And so, it is a challenge. And I think it's very difficult to automate a lot of this process because a lot of it, as John mentioned, you've got to look at it. A human being has to look at it today to understand, is this capable of being, brought back into inventory and resold to the consumer.
Yeah. And then one more thing, this is a fantastic point you bring up, Matt. One thing also to think about, every once in a while, there's hey, we'll credit you back. Don't send it back to us because we're just going to trash it anyway, right? So, it's a substantial problem. It's been compounded year over year as e-commerce rates have increased, as consumer, buying patterns have evolved. What we're buying through e-com channels have evolved. I mean, not too long ago, 5, 6 years ago, you really wouldn't buy shoes in certain channels. You want to go in and try them out. And now, I mean, went recently to buy a pair of basketball shoes and ended up having to order them online because they just don't carry the variety and size, color, style that they used to because of the growth of the e-commerce channels.
Yeah, I was reading on the internet, if you can trust that, that the average return costs about $33 to process when you factor in labor and all the time and the shipping and the postage. And when you order an $8 whatever on Amazon, yeah, there's a pretty big business case for Amazon to say, you know what, just keep it. We don't want it. It's going to cost way too much to bring that into our warehouse to be restocked. So, it's a challenge. I mean, it's a tremendous amount of waste. It's waste in capital, but it's also waste in just product and the environment and everything else that comes with the changing ways that Americans buy goods.
There is so much that I can relate to on this front, to the point where, John, I will one up you with several sizes in one shoe. Then you've got to say, well, okay, I'm going to get the shoe in brown, but I might like it in white. I might like it in black. And you're ordering all those sizes, to the point where I was in one store recently. I won't say which name, but I was looking on the, if I say it, Last Act, some people might connect it with the particular department store. And I said, oh, this shoe looks really familiar. And I realized it was a shoe that I had bought that was returned to the store that was now being resold. So lots of returns there. And as we said, we're all responsible. So Matt, I want to ask you this. When it comes to returns, we're seeing obviously an uptick, but has the returns processing improved or worsened in the past few years, and why?
Well, to the extent it's worsened is only because there's more of it. And I think that that's a greater burden on organizations. I do think there is more adoption of technology for returns processing. And I think that really stems from very strong warehouse management systems. So really at the software level, and that's what Körber can really bring to the table is that WMS and having that really perfected. So when that return hits the dock, there is a clear software layer that can handle that. Then you can start talking about hardware and, well, what can we automate? Can we do something that eliminates a human being from touching the product? And how many times does that human being touch the product? Can we automate that workflow? So I think there's a big gap here, to be honest. But I do think it has improved from the standpoint of the technology, and the software has improved and it's ready to handle this. I think there's still so much need in the returns processing that the technology and the technology adoption has not kept up with how much consumers are returning product and the rate they're returning product all at once. I mean, you're really seeing a second peak season in January of returns from the peak season that you had prior to Christmas and the holidays.
Yeah, you mentioned the software layer, Matt, and I think that's spot on. I think the impact has been to scale, to your point, right? There's just more. There's a bigger flood of this stuff. I will say, I think industry-wide, from the software side of things, we have seen a bit of an acute focus on how do we tackle the returns problem for our customers, right? Because, inventory coming in, you want to determine, is it resaleable or, is it set for destruction? Where do you store that in the warehouse? More importantly, how do you get that product that's come back into active inventory, so the next time there's an order for that unit, you can get it back out the door. Part of the challenge here too, to really dial in the complexities is, especially in the apparel industry, you might get something back and that might be the last one of its style, right? And we see a lot of that. And so when we're looking at automation driven solutions, which obviously come into play after you've got the product back into the inventory, you want to put that back into your picking system. You've got to decide, is this unit resaleable? Do we put it back into active inventory? And does that go into our static rack where we've got manual operations? Does it go into our automated solution area? Does it go into a mixed bin, or do we set it aside? And all of these are some of the decisions that warehouse operators are trying to optimize around, because if you've got let's say, hypothetically speaking, you've got a full tote allocated to a single t-shirt that was returned. Now, what's the probability you're going to end up selling that t-shirt? Maybe you have to have it there, maybe you don't, right? And you've got to be in a position to determine mathematically the probability of the cost associated with storing that unit in a picking system or a storage location versus the cost of just moving it out of the business.
Are you seeing any AI kind of being integrated into this kind of decision-making process? From, can this be resold? What is the damage to the goods, the viability of the resale or the return? Are you seeing artificial intelligence play a role in any of this?
So I'll speak generally on the topic. Artificial intelligence being applied at every technological process within the supply chain, right? Today, we're seeing a lot of point-driven AI solutions, right? So almost, pocketed applications of artificial intelligence. If you took an AI algorithm that was designed to see returns data and make intelligent decisions around routing, for example, if you took that same application and put it into a slotting engine, it's not built for that. So it's not, it's programmed intelligence for purpose, right? But we're seeing that all across the supply chain in every application. Machine learning and artificial intelligence is a modern lever to that next level of productivity enhancements through technology. Specifically speaking, right, I don't have the insight to dial into what application is being built specifically for returns management. What I can say with 100% certainty is, yes, it's being done. It's a function of who's the leader in that space.
So let me ask you this, John, because Matt mentioned software is making things easier, talking about AI. It's being used with everything, and obviously is sure to come into play here as well. But in the big picture, obviously we've got these pain points, but we're also talking about some solutions. So what strategies or best practices can businesses adopt to better manage their returns processing in a cost-effective way? Can you share maybe some real-world examples?
Certainly I can. I mean, again, thinking about it, it's inbound process. You've got to break it down into the buckets that apply for the overall returns process, right? Something has to be in a customer's hand, and there has to be a process for orchestrating the return, right? So that's one aspect in the process. Then you've got your receiving process. How is the material getting off the vehicle that it's coming to the facility into? Where is it being routed to? And then how is it being handled from there? And then, as we talked about prior, you might have an inspection process that's a part of that, and then a decision tree around the fitness of that product to go back into active inventory or not, right? Go for repairs, go for refurbishment, or go for destruction. And then you've got the process of how do you physically handle and allocate that inventory to its next locations, right? So if you break down the processes, best practice, really look at each of those components of the processes as a piece of the overall, right? Because I think we all know anytime you improve one area of a process, you run the risk of sub-optimizing somewhere else, right? So you want to make sure that you're looking at it from the complete picture, but also being able to realize that you can decouple that process of getting something from the customer's door to your door from the process of where do you put it in the building, right? Those are completely decoupled. Now, you might want to think a little bit more hard around where those linkages are between getting from the customer's door to returns at your building, right? Those are tangential processes, right? One flows right into the next. So, you really want to look at from a process-driven perspective, the steps that are going through the life cycle of that returns management. Now, how do you once it's in the building, right? That's where applying a best in class WMS can really start to improve the overall process because these tools are built for helping guide decision making within the operation itself. Once it's passed through quality inspection, for example, and it's ready for induction back in active inventory, there's got to be a material flow process within the WMS that directs each of those steps along the way. And then once it's back into inventory, how do you then apply that to the hierarchy of outbound, right? Are you going to prioritize what's come back in to go be next out the door? And you want to really think about things in that context because something that comes in, if it is allocated for, for active inventory, you want to cycle through that, probably more quickly because it probably was in the door first. That's why it went out sooner. So get that back out the door. And then where do you store that product in the physical construct of the building to allow you to do that? Like I mentioned, if you are using, for example, a goods to person tote system like the Hai Pick, are you allocating that piece of inventory into a tote? If you are, is it going into a multi-SKU tote because it's a single item? Are you putting it back in with its like items if they exist? Or are you standing into a completely separate area of the business where you allocate returns inventory because you probably are handling singles, right? And looking at each of those processes within the overall end-to-end flow is really how you can start to dial in where those areas of opportunity exist.
So it's funny, and as that was well said. But if you think about everything John just said, think about an organization that has to do that for every item. All those decisions he just outlined, and so that's really where, as the software improves, that's got to be really in the deep trench of the returns processing architecture. It's not so much about the automation, although you get to that as John mentioned, but it really is the software decisions that come into place. And I'm curious, John, as you kind of are around the industry, tip of the spear, I would say, in the software layers, are you seeing a lot of 3PLs kind of come into play at the returns processing, or is it more still on some of the manufacturers and the brands to do this? Because I've seen a number of 3PLs that are dedicated to returns processing, and then they'll bring it in, and then they will sell it back on kind of a secondary or tertiary market at a lower cost. Is that a trend you're seeing a lot as well?
I mean, I don't necessarily know that it's a trend as much as it is a business model, right? You're 100% right. We are seeing a growth in, back end returns management in the 3PL industry for sure. But to answer the question you asked, who's doing it? Each channel is in some degree handling returns management, whether it's going to a 3PL, going back to the manufacturer, going back to the the middle distributor, etc. Oftentimes that's a business decision, right? And you may have scenarios where there is a 3PL doing it on contract for a company that's still taking it direct. And again, the decision of where is it routing, right? Where is that product routing? You may have product driven decisions that say, retailer, these product categories, they're going to come back into our facility. They're easy for us to manage those returns. This other category tends to be a bit more complex. Maybe there's more rework to be done. Maybe there's a lower value to bringing them in, and maybe you offload those to a 3PL, for example. But 100%, that methodology, the ability to leverage third-party logistics providers to handle the returns function, is something that we're seeing. And there's companies that are dedicating their business to and creating a full-on business model. And I'd wager that those companies are pretty geared up for the next coming months.
We're looking to tackle these challenges from a few different angles. So, Matt, I want to ask you, what role can goods to person automation play in addressing the challenges of returns processing?
Well, I mean, what goods to person automation seeks to do at the end of the day is to eliminate wasted actions that an operator has to take, specifically walking. So when we can really help an operator not have to walk 4, 5, 6 miles throughout a warehouse to restock, to pick, to do any type of cycle count, that definitely saves a lot of cost for the organization, and it really enhances the employee's experience. People ask me all the time when I tell them I sell robotic automation, they immediately go to, well, you're taking jobs away. And the reality is we're enhancing an operator's experience. We're taking away all the walking, all the things that exhaust someone, and we're allowing them to focus more on the decision criteria that John highlighted earlier about, do we take this back in inventory? Is this product capable of being resold? And those types of decisions are still very difficult to automate with technology and with robotics. And so we're really taking, from a goods to person perspective, all those menial tasks, to put it in a rudimentary way, from the operator, and having them do something that's far more intelligent as far as returns processing, restocking, and then can this be picked, packed, and shipped and sent back to a customer.
I want to double click on something you said there, Matt, and I think there's other points of value to call out here as well, and I'll do that in a moment also. But you mentioned the job circumstance, right? And a very unknown fact, right? Automation started making its way into automotive manufacturing in the 70s, right? That's when you started to see robots go into that industry, and the same concerns existed. What is unknown to many is that as that industry deployed more and more automation, the number of jobs in that industry increased. The economic value of that industry increased. So we've seen more jobs in the automotive industry. They're just different. They're pivoting to different roles and creating opportunities for humans to do what we're really good at, as opposed to focus on repetitive menial tasks that can be automated, right? When we talk about robotic automation, especially in the warehouse, it's about those repetitive tasks that we can automate to free a human operator up to focus on things that humans are better equipped for, is one way to put it, or more aligned to. And we often find, where we are deploying this technology, we see higher employee retention rates, because you're starting to reduce the strain associated with a part of the job. As you mentioned, Matt, pushing a heavy cart up and down aisles, many miles every day, is not necessarily the most pleasant thing to do. So we're targeting, with mobile automation, how do we take that out? How do we take that function out of the equation? But then you get additional points of value, right? Storage density, right? The cost of storing material in a warehouse, often measured in square footage, cubic feet. How much material can you get into the cubic storage available that you have in the building? And when you talk about goods to person automation, you're starting to bring a higher concentration of products into a smaller square footprint and better utilize the vertical space in the facility for the highest value function in that warehouse, the picking process, right? We're also seeing a lot of improvements in outbound quality, especially when you're talking goods to person. When you're in a traditional environment, for example, and a picker might be walking through a facility looking for locations. And if you have similar products in an area, it's not uncommon for someone to receive a product that isn't exactly what they ordered, right? Might be same category, same color, wrong size, as an example. When you're using goods to person fulfillment, you're bringing up a very defined set of products to a customer. Now, there's different approaches to goods to person, right? You've got your traditional shelf, right? You put cases of products on a shelf and you move that shelf directly to a picker. You've got your tote, then you've got your tote to person scenarios, and in those environments, you're putting a very fixed cubic volume of space with a very defined set of SKUs in front of a customer, in front of a picker. You really start to bring down the risk of a mispick because you're putting the product right in front of them and saying, here, one of what's in this box is going into a different box and going out to a customer. When you've got single SKU storage location, that's really easy to eliminate that risk. When you've got multi SKU locations, you still have a user interface that's showing a picker exactly what they need to pick. If you've got in some of these totes, you can segment them and you might have 6 locations. And so now you're going to show on the screen a highlight of the location that they're picking in, a picture of the product they're having, and then you scan the product to make sure you got the right thing in the first place. So we're taking, with the goods to person systems, a lot of the risk of outbound quality out of the equation as well.
Yeah, no, the accuracy is incredibly costly. And I think it's often overlooked in the ROI evaluation that a lot of companies go through. They think about the storage density, as John mentioned, cost per square foot, and obviously the outbound rate, the throughput. But, what is the cost every time you have somebody mispick? I was at a facility yesterday as a 3PL. I won't say who, but it's about $3 for every time someone mispicks and has to go find that other item. And at the end of the day, it ends up being hundreds and thousands of dollars that accrue. And over a year, it can be tremendous. And that is often, overlooked, I think, on the sales side, but also on the buyer side, on how to really evaluate, is this a good decision? And is there a business case to move forward with this type of automation?
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, I recently had a customer that we worked with that had a 7-figure a year outbound quality problem. That wasn't the only problem they were looking to solve, but it was a 7-figure a year problem. And it was essentially eliminated when we started to go live with the goods to person picking solutions. This particular industry, right? It was bulk picking of unserialized goods in the apparel industry. So, there was a risk of something being put away in the wrong location. The next picker comes along and they pick from the right location, but they're picking the wrong product because the right product was put in the wrong box, in the wrong storage location. So now we're presenting the product that needs to be picked at a point in time, and there's no risk of putting something away in the wrong location. So that aspect of it, right? And outbound quality is quantity, you know, and then the product, that you have. So if you're in an environment where you're getting multiples of the same SKU, that's where this particular risk occurred. But we were able to eliminate a 7-figure a year problem with goods to person picking. That wasn't the only point of value, but this particular customer definitely highlighted that on the front end of the discovery process. And this is one of the things that we're going to measure when we look at the return on this investment.
And clearly there's a big learning curve here, right? Going day by day, learning different things, what did work, what didn't work. And that's why we're having this conversation. So I want to ask both of you this next question. Where do you see returns management heading in the next few years? And then what steps can businesses take now in order to get there and be successful or have the best outcome possible?
I mean, it's going to go lights out at some point. It's already heading that direction on the picking, shipping side, but I think with the returns processing, there's going to be less human touches. There's going to be more intelligent software. And I think, what businesses can do now is they can start talking to companies like Körber, because as John mentioned, there's so many decisions that have to happen when products come back to a warehouse. And a lot of that starts at the software layer. And then, an integrator and a WMS, WES provider like Körber, they can start to coach and counsel the customer on what goods to person technology makes the most sense, because there's a lot out there. And I think that's where it's got to begin, is at the software level.
Yeah, I'll take a little bit of a different track. I think it depends, right? I think there's so many product nuances that exist. We're going to continue to see how do we improve at a product level, right? And we'll see, improvements to returns in environments where you have a robust quality control process. I think in those environments where you don't need the quality control process to be as robust, I think there's a lot of room for opportunity. If you're talking consumer packaged goods, for example, that don't have a lot of moving parts, and you really just got to see, is the thing in the box and is the box undamaged, right? That's where we can start to apply vision-based AI to zero in and say, oh, right thing, box undamaged, back on the shelf, right? And start to get to a higher degree of automation in the process. I think we still see a continued growth in this space, right? Consumer demands for anything you could possibly want at any point in time, 2 days away, is going to continue to foster this behavior where we over purchase because we know that returns is so simple, right? I think that's the big thing, that the consumer behavior is really what has driven the explosion in returns management, right? A lot simpler when when e-commerce wasn't an option, right? When you bought something and you had to take it back to the store, and the store could say, okay, it can go back on the shelf or not, right? Much simpler process. That those days are long gone. I think we certainly start to see improvements in the customer, the consumer component of that process, right? Again, Amazon does it really well. You can return. They give you a menu of return options. They print the label for you and say, go take it to what's most convenient for you, Mr. Customer. But in doing that, they're optimizing their processes for each of those returns channels, right? And it allows them to some degree, narrow down how they're going to return things, because you've got, Whole Foods, Kohl's, or UPS, hypothetically. Each of those are going through a different channel, but they've established the routing structure, the handling, and the decision making around those returns. Again, if you're thinking who's going to be the best in the world, that I think Amazon kind of has to be, right? They sort of set the foundation of growth in this industry, and so to continue to be at the cutting edge and the leading supplier of e-commerce, you've got to have a robust returns process, or you're putting a lot of dollars at risk.
Yeah, the cat is out of the bag. People are not going to change their buying habits, and I think it's up to us to assist companies on how you manage the returns process. So well said.
On that note, any final thoughts to leave our listeners with today?
If I could, Michelle, I as a last and closing thought here, more so for the consumers out there, right? Realize that those boxes that get to your door and the things that you return go through a very robust supply chain that companies are continuously looking to improve. It's not just about how do we get things to our doors that we need to think about. As we're consumers, we need to understand that there's a lot of moving parts that go from, I'm deciding to buy that widget, to that showing up on my door, and oh no, I don't like the widget so much, so I'm going to send it back. There's a lot of work that goes into that. There's a lot of people that go into that process, and so the more education out there to the market, the more we can understand that it's not just a simple, hey, I want this, click, it's at my door process. That there's a lot of things that go into that. I think the better off we will, and we'll start to see improvements in both outbound and returns management in the supply chain industry.
John Santagate, Senior Vice President, Robotics, Körber Supply Chain Software, and Matt Kelly, Director of Business Development for Hai Robotics USA. Thank you both for your time. Definitely an interesting topic, and it's going to be interesting to see how things go in the future with all the returns that all of us, we've established, are responsible for. So thank you for your time. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Indeed. Thanks for having us.
And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and listening to Higher Automation, of course, a podcast brought to you by Hai Robotics. And be sure to visit HaiRobotics.com for more information on all things Hai. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast to hear more engaging conversations like the one you heard today. I'm your host, Michelle Dawn Mooney. Thanks for joining us. We hope to connect with you on another podcast soon.